Well, Paul Skenes and Dylan Crews go 1-2 in the MLB Draft. The first time that has ever happened that two players from the same team get drafted first and second overall. But what does that really do for recruiting the future of LSU baseball?
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Also, do not forget that we're also on YouTube as well, so you can listen on the go on your preferred podcast platform. But check us out on YouTube as well and hit that subscribe button, like, comment, rate, review, all of that great stuff. Appreciate you for being part of the podcast, for interacting with the podcast, and always for making Locked on LSU, your first listen every single day. But let's get into it because, man, oh man, the good press for LSU athletics as a whole and for LSU baseball continues to get printed. The talk about LSU baseball has not simmered even just a little bit since winning the national championship a couple weeks ago, as LSU baseball made history yet again, becoming the first program to produce the first and second overall pick from the same team in the same year. Paul Skenes gets taken number 1 overall by the Pittsburgh Pirates, followed up by Dylan Crews going number 2 to the Washington Nationals. Now, there was a whole lot of speculation about which player would go first overall. There was so much buzz about Dylan Crews being the first player taken, maybe Paul Skenes potentially second to the Washington Nationals if they weren't going to go the high school route or the Wyatt Langford route. It was something that I actually went on a Pittsburgh Pirates podcast to talk about, and they were Dylan Crews, so Dylan Crews, so Dylan Crews, and I was like, look, I mean, and of course, they're not invested in LSU baseball to nearly the capacity that you or me are, and I was like, look, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you, you're not gonna go wrong. Like, there's no wrong choice. They asked me, what would you say? Like, who would you want to take first? Like, what's your take on that? And I was like, honestly, whoever you take, you're giving a gift to the Washington Nationals. You take Paul Skenes, then you're giving the Washington Nationals Dylan Crews on a silver platter, and vice versa. So I think we all knew, we all understood whichever route the Pittsburgh Pirates went down, whether it was Paul Skenes or Dylan Crews. There's not a bad decision in there. There's not a wrong decision in there. But, first time since 2001 that LSU produced two players in the first round, and it didn't just stop at Paul Skenes and Dylan Crews. Ty Floyd got taken 38th overall to the Cincinnati Reds in the competitive balance round. And the competitive balance round is basically just kind of an extension of the first round that the 10 teams in MLB that had the worst records or might be in the smallest markets, they're kind of thrown a bone a little bit by MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred, and they're given kind of competitive advantages just to make sure that everything is even and balanced, that every team has the opportunity to build their team. So Ty Floyd taken 38th overall on night 1 in the competitive balance round. Grant Taylor also taken in the second round as well. It's probably a name that you haven't heard much about in quite some time. Grant Taylor is an incredibly talented pitcher who was out this past season. He got Tommy John surgery at the conclusion of this past season, had a torn UCL. So he was out for the entirety of the season with Tommy John surgery, but I think that just speaks to how talented of a pitcher Grant Taylor truly is, how gifted of a pitcher he is when he goes on night 1 and didn't even throw a single pitch this past season. So awfully impressive. Congratulations to Grant Taylor, to Ty Floyd, to Paul Skenes, to Dylan Crews, because all of those teams, whether it's the Cincinnati Reds or Grant Taylor heading to the White Sox, Paul Skenes heading to the Pirates, Dylan Crews heading to the Nationals, they're all getting good ones. They're absolutely getting good ones. It wasn't all good for LSU baseball on Sunday night as the MLB Draft kicked off. There were several LSU commits who now will not be headed to LSU anymore. One of them being Blake Mitchell. He was taken 8th overall to the Kansas City Royals. He was the top ranked player out of the state of Texas. Obviously, one of the highest ranked prospects in this draft as he was taken 8th overall to the Kansas City Royals. He was the top prospect in LSU's 2023 recruiting class. Obviously, will not be headed to LSU in the fall since he is head of the big leagues, and he just signed inked a pretty solid big deal for the Kansas City Royals. That's just part of it, and he's not the only one. I think there was a handful of 5 or 6 recruits in this 2023 recruiting class that did get drafted in either the first or second rounds, so they will be pursuing their professional careers. That's just what happens. It's unfortunate, and that's what makes baseball recruiting so difficult is because you have to over recruit, understanding that several of those players that you're recruiting likely won't even make it to campus. And that's a good sign because the best players in the country that are already big league ready want to come to your program. So it's a good problem to have all of these recruits that, you get them in the building and you get them signed, you get them committed, and they don't end up coming there. It's a good problem to have because it means that whatever you're doing, however you're recruiting, you're doing it right because the top players in the country want to be part of your organization. But again, trickled into today, into Monday, the MLB draft also continued the third through later rounds. Trey Morgan drafted by the Tampa Bay Rays in the third round. Braden Jobert taken in the sixth. So definitely a myriad of LSU Tigers in the MLB draft as it continues to ensue throughout Monday night. And we got the Home Run Derby tonight, All-Star game tomorrow night. It's a fun time, very fun time in baseball. But coming up next, I keep seeing, this is that, Paul Skenes and Dylan Crews going 1 and 2 overall. This is such a great thing for LSU baseball recruiting. This is perfect for LSU baseball recruiting. This is going to be a great recruiting tool. And I don't totally disagree, but I don't entirely agree. And you might be thinking to yourself, what? But I'll explain. And I'll explain coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about bird dogs. I've been telling you all about bird dogs for a long time now, but I feel like I can't say enough about them because I love them so stinking much. I mean, bird dogs make you look so good. They've got a stretch khaki short that's designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and through the leg and give you a truly sculpted look. So, whenever you're out and about running errands, you don't want to feel like you're, flying all over the place. Bird dog keeps you nice and snatched, and they fit kind of like maybe like a Lululemon short might or other athletic shorts that you might wear that kind of suck you in and make you feel really comfortable, but they fit so much better than regular shorts. They fit better than Lululemon shorts. They fit better and feel better than shorts that are made of that stiff, restricting cotton, but they still look good. They look like a khaki short. They look like a short or a pant that's nice enough to wear to work or to the golf course or wherever it might be, but they also work for going out for a run, going out to the lake. You can wear them as swim trunks. They're so incredibly versatile. They look so good and they are so comfortable as well. That's my favorite thing about my bird dogs. I have 2 pairs. I love them. Ladies, if you're listening, bird dogs are not just for men. They are for you too. They are so stinking comfortable. I was out at the lake for 4th of July weekend and we were out on the lake all day. I came back, changed into my bird dogs, and I was so comfortable and I was so cool all day long, even when it was like 100 degrees with 100% humidity. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or enter promo code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That is birddogs.com/lockedoncollege, or you can use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. I pinky promise you. Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Every dayers coming up tomorrow on the podcast. I want to have a little Jaden Daniels come to Jesus moment because Jaden Daniels has told us that his goals are win the Heisman, win a national championship. I think that those are all very fair and good goals to have. But how does he get there? What does he himself need to do? And what does his surrounding cast need to do to project him there? We'll get into that on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU. But breaking down the MLB draft last night, Paul Skenes and Dylan Crews go 1 and 2. And I've heard this a lot, that this is going to be such a great recruiting tool for LSU baseball. That, if recruits aren't paying attention now, if they weren't paying attention before, now they will. And I don't think that that's a wrong take or a wrong feeling to have. Because whenever you have two players go 1 and 2 in the draft, when you have the two best players in this year's draft from your team, I mean, it doesn't hurt. Whenever you get all of that kind of publicity about your players, about your guys, whenever you continue to prove to whoever it might be, to recruits or players in the transfer portal or just the baseball world in general, that if you want to be excellent, if you want to get to the highest level of baseball in the world, you can do that if you go to LSU. And those are all wonderful recruiting tools. But hear me out for a second. What did we learn on Sunday night during the MLB draft that we didn't already know? What did a recruit or a transfer portal player learn on Sunday night that they didn't already know? I knew going into the MLB draft on Sunday that LSU baseball is a powerhouse for pumping out some of the top talent in Major League Baseball. You don't just get to Major League Baseball through LSU. You succeed in Major League Baseball when you get there from LSU. I already knew that if you go to LSU to play baseball, you will be in contention for a national title, or you might win a national title. I already knew. You already knew. I think anyone who's ever watched a game of baseball already knows that the standard of excellence at LSU, at that LSU baseball program, is higher than just about any other program in America. I didn't learn anything new on Sunday night when Paul Skenes got taken number 1 and Dylan Crews got taken number 2. Because I've been saying for months that those two were going to go number 1 and number 2 overall. So I don't think that it's all of a sudden some sort of, new recruiting tool. And now that there are recruits across the country that are all of a sudden now having LSU on the radar just because of what happened on Sunday night. And you might be thinking, well, that's Debbie Downer, like, geez Louise. But I think that's the best problem to have. That you have done something, your program has done something that has never been done before. 2 players going 1 and 2 from the same team, that's never been done before. The fact that you could achieve that, your players can achieve that. And all it does is just reiterate and reemphasize how excellent your program is. That it's not just, hey, look out for these LSU boys. Like, they're not going anywhere. They're actually a pretty good team. It just solidifies LSU's level of dominance in this sport. So when I say I don't really think it did much for recruiting, it's not because I don't believe that it wasn't a big deal. It's not because I don't believe that the LSU athletic department and LSU baseball shouldn't boast that achievement, because they should, and it is special. But it's because I already knew how special this team was. I already knew how special those players were. And I already knew that those players achieved the next level of excellence because they went to LSU. And man, oh man, if that's not the best problem to have. What I do think it does. What I do think the Paul Skenes going 1 and Dylan Crews going 2, and those 2 not being the only ones from this team being taken in this year's draft. Those 2 are not being the only ones taken in day 1 of the draft. I think it solidifies the excellence of this 2023 LSU baseball team. I look at this draft and what it did for this championship team in a very similar way that I look at how the 2020 NFL draft really kind of solidified and made concrete the impact of that 2019 LSU football team. That not only was that LSU football team one of the best teams in the history of college football, not only was it a championship winning team, not only did it win just about damn near every single award that you could win in college football, but that team also excelled at the next level. That team at the time had more players taken in the NFL draft than any other team in history. So it doesn't take anything away from what that 2019 national championship team did. it just added on top of it. It felt like, in a way, it confirmed everything that we already knew in the best way. That it just made it almost immortal. Seeing the excellence of that team, the 2019 team, excelling at the next level. I think that's what this MLB draft does as well. Can't take away the national championship and the excellence of this LSU baseball team from this past year. It's not going anywhere, but it just feels so much more solidified. It feels so much more immortal now that it has been confirmed that, yep, everything that we thought about Paul Skenes and Dylan Crews and how many good players were on this team, yeah, so did MLB scouts. So did teams at the highest level of this game. That's what I think it does more than anything. I think, though, on Sunday night, the best recruiting tool there was for LSU baseball wasn't Paul Skenes going 1, wasn't Dylan Crews going 2, wasn't Ty Floyd going 38th overall, wasn't Grant Taylor heading to the White Sox in the second round. In fact, I think it had nothing to do with them and everything to do with Jay Johnson. Jay Johnson was on the MLB Draft broadcast on the MLB Network. He was at the table with the entire cast and crew breaking down the draft and calling the draft. Jay Johnson was right up there with him. And Jay Johnson was talking about Paul Skenes and talking about Dylan Crews. And it didn't stop there. He broke down every high school prospect and player that was taken in this year's draft. Had so many positive and great things to say about not just his own players, but players across the draft, players that got drafted from, top to bottom of the first round of the draft last night. So I think that was the best recruiting tool because it was Jay Johnson getting FaceTime. It is constant recognition for the LSU baseball program. It was constantly hammering home how good that team was, how much talent was developed by Jay Johnson and this LSU coaching staff. And I think that just being able to see Jay Johnson, not as Coach Jay Johnson, but as baseball lover and appreciator and fan Jay Johnson, giving him the opportunity to just kind of fanboy out on his guys, giving him the opportunity to show his personality a little bit, to not have to have kind of that coaching stoic brick wall up where, you're keeping the secrets close to the chest and you don't want to give out too much about what your game plan is or what's going on in the dugout or what's going on within your program. Then he could relax a little bit and just have fun and talk about baseball and brag about his players. I think that was the best recruiting tool that we saw on Sunday night because there's probably LSU recruits sitting at home, players in the transfer portal, watching the draft. And yeah, seeing Paul Skenes go 1 and seeing Dylan Crews go 2. I mean, those are all wonderful things that definitely don't hurt your program. But seeing that kind of interaction with Jay Johnson, I think was huge. Being on national television, having your coach on national television, and being so passionate about the sport and his players, that's really what hit it home, at least in my opinion. So no, I mean, it doesn't hurt recruiting at all to have your 2 best players go 1 and 2 overall in the draft. It absolutely is something that this team, this athletic department, LSU as a whole, should boast. That LSU has done something that no other school in the country has done, with players going first overall in all 4 major drafts. You got Joe Burrow going number 1 in the NFL draft, Shaq, and then that one other guy who played basketball at LSU for a little bit going number 1 in the NBA draft, Simone Augustus number 1 in the WNBA draft, and now Paul Skenes going number 1 in MLB draft. Those are things that just kind of emphasize that you are an elite athletic program. But when it comes to recruiting, kind of just focusing in on LSU baseball recruiting, everybody knew how good you were. Everybody knows that if you want to be a star in Major League Baseball, you can do that when you go to LSU. But a little bit more LSU baseball news away from the draft. New name and a new face returning to LSU. We will get into that coming up next. Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. Baseball heavy today. However, we'll get right back into football tomorrow. SEC Media Days is 1 week from today, and it is in my city in Nashville. I'm pumped for it. So we'll have a bunch of SEC Media Days content, not just next week, but later on this week, I'll have a full breakdown of what I want to hear from Brian Kelly, from Jaden Daniels, from Makai Wingo, from Josh Williams at SEC Media Days next week. They are at the podium on Monday. So we'll get right back into football stuff on tomorrow's episode, but just so much baseball news today. I had to get it all out. A little bit of news. A familiar face coming back to Baton Rouge. It was confirmed today. It was reported by D1Baseball.com and confirmed by Jay Johnson that Jay Johnson has hired Terry Rooney as the director of recruiting and player development. Now, Terry Rooney might be a name that sounds familiar to you. It might not. But Terry Rooney was on Paul Mainieri's staff early in Paul Mainieri's career when he took the LSU job. So Terry Rooney was part of Paul Mainieri's staff at Notre Dame in Paul Mainieri's final 2 years rather at Notre Dame, which we don't talk enough about how many coaches we've poached from Notre Dame. It's really just Paul Mainieri and Brian Kelly, but still, it's kind of weird that it happened twice. Whatever. So he was with Paul Mainieri on his staff as a pitching coach at Notre Dame, followed Paul Mainieri to LSU. In 2007 and 2008, he was part of that coaching staff that led LSU to the College World Series. Didn't win it that year, of course, then won it the next year, but at least got to Omaha that year. Spent a couple of years at LSU as the pitching coach. Then he left LSU after the 2008 season to be the head coach at UCF. He had several other stops along the way, head coaching jobs, pitching coaching jobs, several stops throughout his career. But he most recently has been the pitching coach and director of recruiting at Purdue. Now, Terry Rooney is a name that, even if it's not familiar to you, if you don't remember his tenure at LSU, he's a very highly respected and widely regarded member of the college baseball community. He's very, very highly respected. A name that I think has contacts all across the country. He's a face that is probably familiar to all of the college baseball gurus and coaches across the country. So it seems like a good hire. I think that it's interesting the role that he's assuming at LSU, not playing a pitching coaching role, which is something that he's done at several of his stops in the past, that he's simply just playing that kind of director of recruiting, operations, development, a little bit more of a holistic off the field role rather than a hands-on, skill position type of coach. But I think it's going to be a good addition. This team has been absolutely rolling with recruiting, having a little bit more depth. I say depth in the coaching way, but having just another pair of eyes on recruiting and having someone who is specifically reserved for recruiting or NIL deals. I kind of view this role, and this may be a completely incorrect translation of how I view this role, and this is just simply my interpretation of the role, not something that has been reported. But like Brian Polian's role, off the field role with LSU football, kind of like that GM type of role. That's kind of how I view this. That he's going to be involved with the players, involved with recruiting, kind of taking care of more of the off the field stuff rather than the day-to-day game day operations. But it seems like a good hire. Excited to have Terry Rooney back in the fold with LSU baseball. But that is going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked In LSU your first listen every single day. Coming up tomorrow on the podcast, is Jaden Daniels a legitimate contender for the Heisman? We'll answer that question coming up on tomorrow's edition of Locked In LSU.